And the muster of Rangatira class Maoris, or more on point, the ones that appear to be taking the piss out of New Zealand taxpayers, certain well-known actors come to mind. Obviously front and centre at this point in time is the head of the Tamahiri fiefdom, John Tamahiri. Lord John and his Te Partly Maori entourage, or what's left of them, are closely followed by the likes of Willie Jackson, Baden Barber, Helmut Modlik, Sonny Tao, and so on and so on. There's also some other less well-known Rangatira activists working away behind the scenes to resist the authority of the Crown and undermine our democracy. Let me introduce you to public enemy number 2, Tureiti Moxon. Moxon is the Rangatira activist who's made a formal complaint to the United Nations alleging that our government is racist towards what she refers to as our people, by which she means the fractional descendants of treaty subjects, people who have an ancestor who was lucky enough to be granted British subjecthood in the Treaty of Waitangi back in 1840, aka Maoris. The actual complaint and the submissions on it are not publicly available at this point in time, but there's no doubt about the charges Moxon is making. She's already agitated several times in the Waitangi Tribal Union, making the same misconceived allegations. Her complaint to the UN is simply an escalation of her endless ethnic victimhood war against New Zealand. Recently, Moxon also gave a helpful interview in which she covers the substance of her complaint and unwittingly betrays her flawed reasoning. Let's watch that together.
Today, one of the most prominent Maori health advocates, Lady Tureiti Moxon, is taking a warning to the United Nations about New Zealand's health system and Indigenous access to it, filing a formal human rights complaint. And she joins us now. Good morning.
Morena.
Morena, good to see you. So how does this work? What do you actually do with the formal process? How does it work?
Well, we will be heading to Geneva this evening, and we will have time with the committee to discuss our issues and the things that we think are very important to be speaking with the UN about in terms of the racial discrimination, really, in our country and the issues that we have been faced over the last wee while. And then we will have an opportunity to have a 3-minute spiel to speak to them, and then we hopefully will be able to see the response from the Crown delegation that are going over.
When you say racist health system, can we be very specific about what we're talking about? Because I think in this country, there's been a tendency for one side to say everything, the health system is racist, and the other side to interpret that as meaning that it's a deliberate undermining of Māori health. So when you say that, do you mean that our doctors and nurses are racist and they are saying, I'm not treating you or I'm not following that up because you're Māori or you're brown?
Well, what we have are inequities in health. So basically that means that we have a system that does not treat Māori in the same way as is being told to the whole public that they treat others. For example, we die 7 years younger than everybody else. We die twice as much from every single cancer than everybody else. We die twice as much from cardiovascular disease. We die twice as much from just about every disease there is, and we do not get diagnosed in time, and that is part of the issue. So every single time somebody presents to the hospital or presents to their doctor, they are not necessarily given the same options and opportunities as others. For example, there was a piece of research that was done, and that piece of research basically showed very clearly that a lot of those who had asthma were not offered the preventative for asthma. They were offered just the Ventolin, which would stop asthma at that time. And yet, believe it or not, Māori have the highest rate of lung cancer in the whole world. So, when you look at statistics like that and data like that, and the research is saying that the health system is not treating Māori in exactly the same way as they're treating others, then you've got to say there is a problem here.
Totally agree there's a problem. What you mentioned, lung cancer, sadly, Māori also have a higher incidence of tobacco consumption, of smoking. So some people might say, well, is that the health system's fault? Is that not contributing to the very some of the statistics that you're talking about?
It's the funniest thing, but the way in which we promote products in our country, and smoking was something that everyone did socially, and it was all touted out to be, the most amazing thing to do. And then we find out much later that smoking is actually killing us, right? And then what does our government do just recently? They go and change the law. They change the legislation. They lift the regulations around it. They lift it off, so it makes it easier for tobacco companies to come in and sell their wares. And so what we've got now is another issue, and that is vaping. So we have a government that puts together a advisory group, and then they put on people from tobacco companies to talk about what's the best way forward in terms of health for our people. Vaping is the way forward. But what we know, and from the respiratory from a respiratory conference I just went through, the Respiratory Foundation, is that vaping has huge numbers of chemicals in it that are actually detrimental to our health, and it is hugely addictive. And we've got little babies, our little children, smoking it. And they are being addicted as children.
Yeah, it's terrible. Lady Tureiti, I just want to ask you this question, and it's a genuine question. You're off to the UN, you're trying to get something done, which I totally understand. But in the process, you have just mentioned tobacco companies, and they deserve blame. The government needs to be blamed because it's not pulling its weight. The health system needs to be blamed. What about individual? Are we disempowering individuals from making smarter, wiser health choices about their own health? Taking ownership of, I need to stop smoking, I need to do this, I need to follow up on my doctor's visit, I need to take control of my health story, that kind of stuff. Is there a risk, I guess, in one narrative kind of outweighing the other?
Well, it's like anything. We spin the story we want to hear, and we blame the victim. And that's what society has always done. We blame the victim. It's your fault. You could have stopped doing it. You could have done this. You could have done that. But the issue is our governments and successive governments create the problem, and then they get Maori providers to get in there and to try and fix the problem, and then they try and what's the word? Then they try and create a situation which we are in now, which is to save money. And in order to save money, they've got to make money. And so who do they make money off? They make money off the backs of people's misery. That's what they do. And they've continuously done that. And I tell you what, the Commission of Inquiry into Abuse of State and Church is a prime example, and yet nothing has been done. And those victims, those survivors, are all still waiting for something to be done. But they're making decisions quite independently of them. And this goes on and on and on. And they create the problem, and then they expect us to fix it up, and then say to us, just like the vaping example I gave, vapes are going to be a big issue. It actually rots your teeth. And so we're going to have a whole lot of gummy people in the future. So what do you... So they create the problem, they make people do things that they ought not to be doing to push products that are are basically harmful to our people. And that's been seen time and time again, and yet it continues.
We need to be careful to understand the incredibly salient point that Ryan almost got across to Moxon in the interview. In substance, Moxon's claim of racism isn't based on the idea that the descendants of treaty subjects are discriminated against by being treated differently to sovereign subjects. Oh no. No. What Moxon is arguing is that the descendants of treaty subjects are being discriminated against by being treated the same as sovereign subjects. Because, Moxon argues, when they are treated equally, the descendants of treaty subjects make poorer lifestyle choices and end up having worse health outcomes than sovereign subjects. Let's critique her smoking example. Moxon is arguing that if the government upholds the rights of all New Zealanders, regardless of their ancestry, to decide for themselves whether or not to smoke, that's racial discrimination against the descendants of treaty subjects. Moxon reasons that this is because proportionally more descendants of treaty subjects than sovereign subjects choose to smoke, and that has the obvious consequence of proportionally more descendants of treaty subjects than sovereign subjects having poor health outcomes from smoking. Applying the same reasoning, there is in Moxon's mind justification to ban not just tobacco, but pretty much all takeaways, all alcohol, and any other commodity with which the descendants of treaty subjects choose to self-harm. And this crackpot reasoning isn't new. Swaito academic Lisa Timoranga has similar views. There's a video report about Timoranga's irrational nonsense queued at the end of this video. Moxon believes that the descendants of treaty subjects would have better health outcomes if they lived in a socio-political structure that has authority mirroring pre-1840 Maori feudal society. Again, let's take her smoking example. In Moxon's preferred feudal society, a small group of people chosen by ancestry would wield the authority to regulate the importation, production and use of tobacco in New Zealand. These ostensibly benevolent Rangatira leaders, in her mind, would completely ban tobacco for the betterment of the health of the descendants of treaty subjects. The reality, of course, would look quite different. Imagine allowing the Tamahiri fiefdom to regulate tobacco in New Zealand. Would John A. go smoke-free, or B. line his pockets with billions in excise tax? Another problem, of course, with Moxon's reasoning is that it ignores the stratification of Maori feudal society into socio-economic classes and the inequity that exists between those classes. Moxon ignores New Zealanders like Dame Whina Cooper, who died aged 98, living about 28 years longer than a female treaty subject descendant of her time usually would. Sir Aparana Ngata lived 35 years longer than what a male treaty subject descendant of his time usually would. Our own Premier statesman Winston Peters is almost 7 years past his best before date under the Maori mortality calendar, yet he's still clearly in his prime and at the top of his game. Moxon is employing the old sleight of hand that compares the outcomes of treaty subject descendants to the outcomes of sovereign subjects, rather than comparing the outcomes of the various socio-economic classes within the society of the descendants of treaty subjects. Moxon's logic failure is glaring when she says that treaty subject descendants who live as Maoris have poorer health outcomes than sovereign subjects. What she's really admitting, whether she likes it or not, is that a New Zealander living as a Maori, which literally means smoking, drinking alcohol and eating takeaways, has poorer health outcomes compared to a New Zealander who chooses to live a healthy lifestyle. Similar logic failures from Moxon and people like her are very common. Take, for example, the often-aired complaint that descendants of treaty subjects are less likely to have intergenerational wealth to pass on to their children. This was one of the arguments put forward in Timoranga's propaganda piece published by Radio New Zealand. In reality, the intergenerational wealth of the descendants of treaty subjects is sequestered by their tribal entities rather than personally held and passed on to their own children as inheritance wealth. It's not a lack of wealth, it's just that the common Maori has no control over tribal wealth that in European society would be held as private property. It's simply the difference between capitalist and communist property rights. But here's where the rubber really meets the road. Moxon is allied with the Tamahiri fiefdom, or at least she was over the last couple of years. It's a little hard to keep up with what's going on while the Te Pātili Maori wars are in full swing. One of the Kapaki boys is a director of Moxon's business. Hemi is one of Eru's triplet brothers against whom Lord John is reportedly determined to get Utu. Eru's mum, Maria Mino, is also the chairperson of Moxon's charity entity. It's not clear if Moxon is siding with Lord John or the newly formed Kapapa Romaine Ferris Iwi. She's got allegiances going both ways. But one thing is absolutely clear. Moxon is definitely a Maori Party asset. She's not a neutral actor. She's an ethno-Marxist with a hostile agenda towards democracy. Lord John and Moxon were both involved in the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency before it lost its taxpayer-funded contract. And significant taxpayer funding for Moxon's business, Te Kohau Health Limited, was funneled through the Tamahiri Fiefdoms Commissioning Agency. In the past, Moxon and Tamahiri have been flat-out tikangering many millions of taxpayer dollars for their various ethno-grifting enterprises. The now disestablished racist Maori Health Authority has given Moxon's business millions of taxpayer dollars during its 2-year existence. So millions of dollars of taxpayer funding being cut, that would have nothing to do with Moxon waging war against New Zealand and the Waitangi Tribal Union, and now the United Nations, right? Of course not. Moxon doesn't care about losing millions of dollars in taxpayer funding. She's only interested in saving her people from the evils of having the same opportunities as sovereign subjects to kill themselves with alcohol, tobacco, and fast food. Moxon also ignores that the statistics on Maori health outcomes include a substantially increasing number of sovereign subjects who choose to identify as Maoris on their health registrations to take advantage of the special healthcare privileges available to Maori-identifying New Zealanders. The statistics are increasingly irrelevant because they simply don't reflect the outcomes of the people that Moxon claims as hers. If you give anyone a form and a free choice to tick A for first class or B for second class, what the hell do you think they're going to do? And of course, the sovereign subjects who sign up for these perks are mostly a lower socio-economic cohort and themselves in need of a subsidy, which skews the statistics even more. The money that you and I pay as taxpayers to support Moxon's ongoing and substantial campaigning in the Maori ethnic grievance industry is difficult to measure, but it's in the millions. We literally have to pay for this unhinged woman to wage war on our own country. To my mind, this illustrates a serious paucity of checks and balances in regard to taxpayer grievance funding. There are few, if any, mechanisms such as cost orders to deter malevolent actors like Moxon from persistent vexatious claims. What do you think? Should Moxon be given taxpayer funds to pursue her ethno-Marxist agenda against New Zealand, or should she be proscribed as public enemy number 2, made to pay costs, and banned from receiving any further taxpayer funding for her business or her vexatious campaigning? Those are my views. Leave a comment and let me know yours. Thanks for watching. Give us a like, would ya? And do hit subscribe to be notified of new content as it drops. See you next time.